So in the last video that I uploaded, I talked about Eric Bledsoe getting traded from the New Orleans Pelicans along with center Steven Adams for Jonas Valanciunas, and now all of a sudden, Bledsoe has once again been traded as he's heading from Memphis back to the team that he actually started his career with, the LA Clippers. Today though, I want to talk about why this trade will have actually a big effect on both teams, and bigger than you might think, as the Grizzlies got two key veterans for their young core, and while the Clippers' new starting point guard averaged more points per game last season than their previous one, they also have lost key production and leadership off their bench. What's up guys, SCJ here, and if you enjoyed today's video, then make sure to give it a like as it helps out a lot, and if you're new to the channel and or enjoy the NBA, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. So last night, the Memphis Grizzlies made yet another trade during this offseason, this time with the LA Clippers, as they traded away their newly acquired point guard Eric Bledsoe for Rondo, Patrick Beverley, and 2020 draft pick Daniel Oturu. This was a trade that confused me when I first got the notification from Woj into my phone, but once I saw this tweet from ESPN front office insider and former Nets assistant GM Bobby Marks, the reason for this trade became very obvious and clear. You can see the Clippers made this move with the sole purpose of clearing up cap space. The Clippers, or really I should say owner Steve Ballmer, is going to save a huge $30 million on his luxury tax bill, but my biggest question is why does this team care about the tax bill when owner Steve Ballmer has a net worth of over $85 billion and he's also the richest owner in the entire league? That's not to even mention that the Clippers made it to the Western Conference Finals this past postseason even without their best player, Kawhi Leonard. Maybe they felt Bledsoe would be a better fit on the roster as an offensive option, but Bledsoe's player efficiency rating last year wasn't that good, and while he did average more points than both Patrick Beverley and Rondo did individually, I feel like Beverley and Rondo were huge and important pieces that came up big for the Clippers last season. Another important thing to mention is that the Clippers were the second-ranked team in terms of offensive efficiency last season behind the Brooklyn Nets, who had 3 All-Stars in a stacked roster. So for the Clippers to make a roster change like this is kind of mind-boggling in my opinion, especially since, like I mentioned in my last video, Bledsoe nearly had the second worst season of his whole career in terms of efficiency. And while a possible reason for that was the fact that he was on a young and mediocre Pelicans team, at the same time, Zion's efficiency was historically good for a second-year player, as he had the 6th highest efficiency rating of any player in the entire league and the 4th highest if we only look at players who played over 10 games during the 2020-21 season. So for Bledsoe, there's really no excuse for his poor play and very inefficient play last season. Moving on and looking at their numbers in terms of defensive efficiency, the Clippers had the 8th most efficient defense in the entire NBA last season. And if you average out their offensive and defensive numbers, the team also had a net rating of 6.1 last season, which was good enough to get them the second best net rating in the entire league behind the Utah Jazz, who were potent this past season and won the most games of any team in the league. So that's obviously great company for the Clippers to be in. It really seems like that rating is about to take a nosedive though. In terms of the Clippers' play in the 2020-21 season, Beverley was the biggest reason for their defensive efficiency, as he had the best defensive rating of any player in the Clippers' rotation during this past season, but that's aside from another man the Clippers just traded away, Rondo, who only started playing for the Clippers in April but had a higher defensive efficiency rating. And the way you know Beverley's presence will be missed, and these numbers aren't just fabricated, is if you look at how the Clippers played with Beverley on the floor versus without him. Beverley missed the last 5 games of the first round in the 2020 playoffs last year with a calf injury, for those that don't remember. But when he did play the 2020 postseason, even despite being on a minutes restriction and dealing with a lingering injury for pretty much all of the Clippers' second round series against the Denver Nuggets, the Clippers had a defensive rating of 99.4 points per 100 possessions in the 166 minutes that Beverley was on the floor for them. Without him, though, that defensive rating took a spike, and it spiked significantly as the Clippers' rating jumped all the way up to 101.9 points per 100 possessions in 463 minutes. So even though Bledsoe averaged more points last season, Beverley had a better player efficiency rating, and like I just showed, his defensive impact on the Clippers as a team was enough to change the outcome of a game. So Steve Ballmer and the team trying to cut their tax bill down doesn't seem like it's going to be worth the price that they'll ultimately pay on the court unless they use that cap space that they cleared up to acquire a 3rd star or all-star level player. In terms of the Grizzlies though, it seems like they can do no wrong this offseason. While I think no more Jonas Valanciunas is a big loss for them, they acquired a ton of assets, and you have to remember the injuries that they dealt with during this past season, the biggest being to their then third-year big man, Jaren Jackson Jr., who played great basketball during the 2019-20 NBA season. So despite the loss of Valanciunas, Steven Adams should be fine to fill in his place, and they have a great young big in Jaren Jackson, who I think will come up huge for them this season if, of course, he stays healthy. Jackson had a very solid efficiency rating of 18 despite only playing in 11 games this past season. But even without Jackson this past season, the Grizzlies were a pretty efficient team, as they were exactly middle of the pack in terms of offensive efficiency, holding the 15th ranking, but they held the 7th best defensive rating in the league, narrowly beating out the LA Clippers, who they just stole 2 of their best defensive players from in terms of defensive statistics. The Grizzlies' net rating was only the 14th best in the league, but their offensive efficiency is, of course, the main blame for that. Regardless, though, expect them to climb up the rankings next season after the acquisitions of Beverley and Rondo. The only question mark is how Adams will be, as he defensively had the worst defensive rating of his entire career with the New Orleans Pelicans this past season, so hopefully for the Grizzlies' sake, he can get back on track. So anyway, like we've seen from a lot of the numbers that I brought up and shown in this video, the winner of this trade looks clear as of right now, as long as the Clippers don't end up using that cap space they cleared up to add a third key option to their rotation. The Clippers were the second best team in terms of efficiency on the defensive side of things, yet they traded away the 2 men who were the most responsible for their great defensive ratings. Maybe this trade is bigger for the Clippers than just clearing up the luxury tax bill like I mentioned, and I'm not seeing something, but for a team that was already mediocre in terms of offensive efficiency, Bledsoe's inefficiency would have hurt the Grizzlies, so now they can continue moving forward with their young and solid backcourt of Ja Morant and Dillon Brooks, as well as having 2 great defensive veterans at the guard position, presumably coming off the bench, which I think is a huge deal, especially with the fact that a veteran like Rondo can teach the young guys and help them grow and excel as players. Then, of course, you also have to remember that the man that I'd say is probably their second best player right now, Jaren Jackson Jr., is going to be returning, and for a team that was already efficient defensively last season without him for 61 games, I'll leave you with this. Not only will Beverley and Rondo be a huge boost for the Grizzlies' defense this next season, but in the 11 games that Jaren Jackson Jr. played this season, he had a defensive rating of 106.1 in 23.5 minutes per game that he spent on the floor. Without him, though, the Grizzlies have a defensive rating of 111 in 101 games that Jackson's missed since being drafted by the Grizzlies. So next season, that grit and grind nickname the Grizzlies formerly had may very well return, but this time with some more Showtime offensive flair thanks to their young up-tempo duo of Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. being back on the floor together if they can remain healthy. So anyway guys, sorry for the bit of a break between my videos, but I hate forcing myself to make videos if I'm not passionate about talking about something in terms of the NBA, because I know that it'll feel rushed and it might not even turn out being that good. But I want to thank you all for watching if you made it all the way through, and those are some of the reasons I truly think this trade yesterday was pretty big or significantly big, but I want to know what you guys thought or think about this trade, how you think both teams will play next season, or anything having to do about either team or their players down below in the comment section. Anyway though guys, like mentioned before, if you like this video, then make sure to give it a like as it helps out a lot. And if you're new to the channel and or enjoy the NBA, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. That way you stay up to date with my newest content. Anyway though guys, I'm SCJ and I am out. Peace.